We knew about the planet called Earth for centuries before we made contact with its indigenous species. We spent decades studying them from afar. Our first researchers had to fight for years to even get a grant, of course. They kept getting laughed out of our academic halls. A T-class death world? One that had not only produced sapient life, but a stage 2 civilization. It was a joke, obviously. It had to be a joke. And then it wasn't. We all stopped laughing. Instead, we then got very, very nervous. We watched as the human civilizations not only survived, but grew and thrived, and invented things that we had never even conceived of. Terrible things. Weapons of war. Implements of destruction as brutal and powerful as one would imagine a death world's children to be. In the space of less than 2,000 years, they had already produced progenitors of mass death that would have horrified the most callous dictators in the long, dark history of the galaxy. Already the children of Earth were the most terrifying creatures in the universe. They became the stuff of horror stories, nightly warnings told to children, huge, hulking, brutish things that hacked and slashed and stabbed and shot and burned and still survived, that built monstrous metal things that rumbled across the landscape and blasted buildings to ruin. All that preserved us was their lack of spaceflight. In their obsession with murdering one another, the humans had locked themselves into a rigid framework of physics that thankfully omitted the equations necessary to achieve interstellar travel. They became our boogeymen, locked away in their prison planet, surrounded by a cordon of non-interference, prevented from ravaging the galaxy only by their own insatiable need to kill one another. Gruesome and terrible, yes, but at least we were safe. Or so we thought. The cities were called Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the moment of their destruction, the humans unlocked a destructive force greater than any of us could ever have believed possible. It was at that moment that those of us who studied their technology knew their escape to be inevitable, and that no force in the universe could have hoped to stand against them. The first human spacecraft were exactly what we should have expected them to be. There were no elegant solar wings, no sleek silvered hulls plying the ocean of stars. They did not soar on the stellar currents. They didn't even register their existence. Humanity flew in the only way it could. On all-consuming pillars of fire, pounding space itself into submission with explosion after explosion. Their ships were crude, ugly, bulky things. Huge slabs of metal welded together, built to withstand the inconceivable forces necessary to propel themselves into space through violence alone. The huge dumb brutes simply strapped an explosive to their backs and let it throw them off of the planet. We would have laughed if it hadn't terrified us. Humanity, at long last, was awake. It was a slow process. It took them nearly 100 years to reach their nearest planetary neighbour, 100 more to conquer the rest of their solar system. The process of refining their explosive propulsion systems, now powered by the same force that had melted their cities into glass less than 1,000 years before, was slow and haphazard. But it worked. Year by year they inched outward, conquering and subduing world after world that we had deemed unfit for habitation. They burrowed into moons, built orbital colonies around gas giants, even crafted habitats that drifted in the hearts of blazing nebulas. They never stopped, never slowed. The no-contact cordon was generous and was extended by the day. As human colonies pushed farther and farther outward, we retreated and gave them the space that they wanted in desperation. An attempt at stalling for time, perhaps, or some sort of appeasement, or probably just sheer abject terror. Debates were held daily arguing about whether or not first contact should be initiated, and how, and by whom, and with what failsafes. No agreement was ever reached. We were comically unprepared for the humans to initiate contact themselves. It was almost an accident. The humans had achieved another breakthrough in propulsion physics and took an unexpected leap of several hundred light years, coming into orbit around an inhabited world of ours. What ensued was the diplomatic equivalent of everyone staring awkwardly at one another for a few moments, and then turning around and walking slowly out of the room. The human ship leapt away after some 30 minutes without initiating any sort of formal communications, but we knew that we had been discovered, and the message of our existence was being carried back to Terra. The situation in the Senate could only be described as absolute, incoherent panic. They had discovered us before our preparations were complete. What would they want? What demands would they make? What hope did we have against them if they chose to wage war against us and claim the galaxy for themselves? We waited every day, certain that we were on the brink of war. We hunkered in our homes and stared into space. Across the darkness of the expanse, humanity stared back. There were other instances of contact. Human ships, armed now, entering colonized space for a few scant moments, and then leaving upon finding our meager defensive batteries pointed in their direction. They never initiated communications, and we were too frightened to. A few weeks later, the humans discovered Alphari 296. It was a border world, a new colony on an ocean planet that was proving to be less hospitable than initially thought. Its military garrison was pitifully small to begin with. We had been trying desperately to shore it up, afraid that the humans might sense weakness and attack. But things were made complicated by the disease. The medical staff of the colonies were unable to devise a cure or even a treatment, and what pitifully small population remained on the planet were slowly vomiting themselves to death. When the human fleet arrived in orbit, the rest of the galaxy wrote Alphari off as lost. I was there, on the surface when the great grey ships came screaming down from the sky, crude, inelegant things, all jagged metal and sharp edges barely holding together. I sat there on the balcony of the clinic, full of patience that I did not have the resources or the expertise to help, and looked up with the blank, empty, numb stare of one who is certain that they are about to die. I remember the symbols emblazoned on the sides of each ship, glaring in the sun as the ships landed ferociously on the spaceport landing pads that had never been designed for anything so large. It was the same symbol that was painted on the helmets of every human that strode out of the ships, carrying huge black cases, their faces obscured by dark visors. It was the first flag that humans ever carried into our worlds. It was a crude image of a human figure, rendered in simple straight lines, with a dot for the head. It was painted in white, over a red cross. The first human to approach me was a female, though I did not learn this until much later. It was impossible to ascertain gender through the bulky suit and the mask. But she strode up the stairs onto the balcony, carrying that black case that was nearly the size of my entire body, and paused as I stared blankly up at her. I was vaguely aware that I was witnessing history, and quite certain that I would not live to tell of it. Then, to my amazement, she spoke. In halting, uncertain words, she asked, "You are the head doctor?" I nodded. The visor cleared. The human bared its teeth at me. I learned later that this was a grin, an expression of friendship and happiness among their species. "We are the Doctors Without Borders," she said, speaking slowly and carefully. "We are here to help."